Alright, in this video, this is video number 17 of TEAS Math Tips. And in this video, we're going to look at multiplying polynomials. And this is going to be a general overview. In this first example here, we have one term, this 2x, times two terms. This is a monomial times a binomial. In number 2, we have two terms in this group times two terms in this group. This is a binomial times a binomial. And then number 3, we have a binomial here, and then we have a trinomial in this other group. We have 1, 2, 3 terms. Now I do have that negative 1x right there, but you need to go ahead and understand that oftentimes you do not see a 1 or a negative 1 in front of a variable. It's just understood. Same thing applies here. That's a 1x and a 1x right there. Now, when you take an intermediate algebra course, you will cover these three topics, if you will, in more detail. So I want to give you a general overview. As a matter of fact, if we go back to TEAS Math Tips video number 1, we actually used the distributive property 2 times in that example. And I have many videos on using the distributive property. We apply that same concept to all of these examples, except we're going to be doing more distributive property for this example here and this example here. Now, some people will tell you use the FOIL method and all that stuff too. That is totally fine, but I want to show you one way that works regardless of how many terms you have. So we look at this first example. Let's take this term 2x, this monomial, and let's distribute it to this first term inside of this group, that 5x. If we take 2 times 5, we get 10. But now you want to be careful with your x times your x. X times x is x squared. Just like if you had 3 times 3, that would be 3 squared. Now you could say that is 9, but that same concept applies. In all honesty, what you're really doing here is you have x to the first times x to the first, and you add your exponents here. So 1 plus 1 gives us that 2. So with that in mind, 2x times 5x, that's going to be 10x squared because we are taking x times x. Now take this monomial, this 2x, multiply it by negative 3. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Make sure you watch your signs. And then we have this x, but we're not multiplying by any more x's, so we had that single x with that term. And this is our final answer for number 1. Going on to number 2, we have a binomial times a binomial. And if we take the first term here and we distribute it to the first term in this other group, we will not multiply this x here by this negative 6. We don't multiply by the same terms in the group. We multiply by terms in the other group. Therefore, this x times this x, very similar. We have x squared as mentioned earlier. Then if we take this x times this 8, that is plus 8x. We're taking a variable times a number, and we write this number in front of the variable. That's the best practice there. So what we just did there is we did the distributive property, and we want to repeat this process for the next term in this first group. So let's take negative 6 times x, that's negative 6x. Make sure you watch your signs. And a negative 6 times a positive 8 is a negative 48. Now there will be times, such as this example, where you can go one additional step or some additional steps, and we want to combine like terms here. X squared, there are no more x squareds. But 8x minus 6x is a positive 2x, and then we have our minus 48. This is our final answer for number 2. And now finally, for this third one here, let's take the same concept. We're doing a lot of distributive property. Take this first term, 5x, let's multiply it by the first term in this other group. That's the 3x squared. 5 times 3, that gives us 15. And then we're taking this x times this x squared. Well, let's think about that. X times x squared. That is really x to the first times x squared. That gives us an x cubed. Therefore, when we take 5x times 3x squared, we will get 15x to the third power. Now, I know I'm going to need some more room here, so I'm going to slide this on over. Put a little line here to keep my work divided. And now let's take this 5x times this negative x. Now be careful with your signs here, and remember this was an understood negative 1. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. X times that x is x squared. And now we have to distribute one additional time for this 5x because we have another term over here that's positive 4. So taking that 5x times that positive 4, that's positive 20, and all we have is a single x here. We don't have another x over here. So we're done with the 5x. Now let's repeat this process for this negative 1. So negative 1 times 3x squared. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, and all we have is that x squared left over because we had no additional x's here. Negative 1 times this negative 1x. Watch your signs. Negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1, but I'm just going to write plus x because I'm taking this negative 1 times this negative 1x. That's an understood positive 1, and we had that single x from that right there. And then last but not least, take this negative 1 times this third term. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. Finally, what we can do is we can come and combine like terms, and good practice here is to go from the biggest exponent to the smallest exponent. We have an x cubed term here, and we have no more x cubes. Therefore, the 15x cubed, I'm going to bring it on down. There are no more like terms for the x cubed. Next up would be the x squared. We have a negative 5x squared and a negative 3x squared. Negative 5x squared minus 3x squared is negative 8x squared. So we're done with the x squared terms. Now we have our x terms. 20x plus an understood 1x. 20x plus 1x is plus 21x. And then last but not least, we had this constant term. That's a term without a variable, and that's the only one we have. So I'm going to bring down that minus 4. And this will be your final answer for that one. Now, what I highly recommend you do is go to Google, type in multiplying monomials, binomials, trinomials. You'll find a ton of worksheets with answers included. And there you have it, video number 17 of TEAS Math Tips, Multiplying Polynomials, a general overview. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.